When you wake up at 3 a.m. without any clear reason, it can feel strange, even unsettling. The room is quiet and the world seems asleep, and yet something within you is alert. It is easy to assume it is just restlessness or a random disturbance, but there are moments when the awakening feels deeper than the body. There is a sense that your spirit, not just your mind, has been stirred. In those moments, it is important to pause and reflect, because not every awakening in the night is meaningless. Sometimes the quiet itself carries purpose, and the stillness becomes an invitation rather than an interruption. Night removes the noise of the world. During the day, life is full of voices competing for attention, responsibilities, conversations, worries, and distractions surround us constantly. When you wake in the dark hours, all of that is stripped away. There is no crowd, no urgency, and no pressure to perform. It becomes you and God uninterrupted. That environment is rare and it is valuable. It creates space where the heart can listen without the confusion brought by daylight chaos. The timing is not random because it places you in a moment where your soul is more open to sensitivity, reflection, and connection. Throughout spiritual history, the night has always been associated with divine encounters. Many people discovered direction, comfort, or correction not in daylight, but in darkness, when desperation and dependence were strongest. Waking in the night often exposes what we truly carry inside. Thoughts you suppress throughout the day tend to rise when silence surrounds you. Worries surface, fears whisper, hope waits quietly. In that space, you become aware of things you might avoid while busy. This is not coincidence. It is often confrontation, revelation, or preparation. Waking unexpectedly may also be a sign that something needs attention in your life, emotionally or spiritually. Perhaps you have been overwhelmed and your spirit is demanding alignment. Perhaps you have been strong outwardly but fragile on the inside. The quiet awakening becomes a signal light alerting you that something deeper requires prayer, surrender, or healing. It is not always about danger. Sometimes it is about transformation. It may be that God is stretching you, awakening a hunger for more than routine faith. There are times when a person wakes in the night because intercession is needed, not just for self, but for others. You may not immediately know who or what, but that stirring becomes a call to stand in the gap. It is not uncommon for people to be awakened during spiritual battles they cannot see, but are spiritually assigned to confront. What looks like broken sleep can actually be divine commissioning. Instead of feeling irritated or confused, wakefulness can become an altar. The bed becomes a place of meeting rather than a place of frustration. The darkness becomes a sanctuary rather than a silence. In those hours, prayer carries weight because the heart is bare and honest. Nothing is masked, nothing is rushed. It is just faith breathing in a quiet room, trusting that even an unexplained awakening can hold intentional meaning. When night falls and the world grows silent, something unseen begins to move. While cities sleep, while homes grow quiet, while the body rests, another realm becomes active. The night often feels heavier, not because of darkness itself, but because it removes distractions that protect us from realizing how fragile and dependent we truly are. In that quiet, the soul becomes more aware and the spiritual atmosphere becomes more intense. The night is not empty time. It is charged with purpose, pressure, and possibility. Darkness has a way of magnifying emotions. Fear feels louder. Memories feel closer. Regret feels deeper. Worry seems stronger. During daylight, we are busy enough to outrun these thoughts, but night strips away our escape routes. Everything you avoided in the day feels like it sits beside you in the dark. That is not weakness, that is awareness. And in that awareness, spiritual activity becomes more noticeable. You realize you are not just a body trying to sleep, you are a spirit engaged in a larger struggle. Spiritual conflict does not always manifest as dramatic events. More often, it comes quietly through discouragement, doubt, heaviness, and mental battles. It comes through thoughts that make you question your worth, your future, and even your faith. It comes through emotional exhaustion, unexplainable sadness, restlessness, and anxiety that feels stronger at night than during the day. That is because darkness has a way of pressing against the mind, attempting to weaken resolve and distort truth. Yet just as pressure increases, power is also available. The same hour that brings attack is also the hour that carries authority. This is the moment when prayer becomes a weapon. The atmosphere shifts not by emotion, but by declaration. The night becomes a place where voices are not loud, but spiritual impact is great. When you speak faith in the quiet, it echoes in places you cannot see. When you whisper scripture in your room, it stirs strength beyond your walls. The physical setting may appear still, but the spiritual environment responds to surrender. The battlefield is not outside your window, it is often inside your thoughts. This is where the real war takes place. What you believe in the dark determines how you live in the light. If fear wins in the night, confidence weakens by morning. If faith takes hold at midnight, peace becomes your companion at dawn. Victory is not always loud. Sometimes it is simply the ability to sleep again in calmness after choosing trust over terror. The night tests the heart honestly. During the day, we can perform, but in the dark, authenticity is unavoidable. You cannot hide emotions in silence. Soul wounds rise. Pain asks questions. Longings reveal themselves. But this vulnerability is not defeat. It is a doorway. It is in the quiet vulnerability of night that healing can begin. Strength is deposited when defenses fall. The night does not exist to destroy you. It exists to define you. What you do when no one sees determines how you stand when everyone does. Battles fought in the dark shape victories you experience in daylight. Every moment of prayer at night becomes a seed for resilience the next day. What feels like warfare now is often preparation for purpose later. When the world shuts down, heaven does not. And when sleep breaks, it may be because the soul has moved into unfamiliar territory where resistance meets faith and pressure meets promise. Even unseen conflict carries the evidence that something valuable is at stake. Fear often enters quietly, almost politely, but it never intends to stay small. It begins as a feeling, then grows into a thought, and eventually seeks control over the heart. What starts as worry slowly transforms into unrest, and unrest into paralysis. Fear does not shout at first. It whispers. It suggests, what if this fails? What if this gets worse? What if you are alone? Before long, it builds a world inside the mind that has not yet occurred, but feels painfully real. And the longer a person listens, the harder it becomes to breathe freely in their own thoughts. Prayer steps into fear's territory and refuses to follow its rules. Fear thrives on silence because unspoken thoughts become unchallenged lies. Prayer, however, gives voice to faith. Even when the voice shakes, it interrupts the cycle of dread. A whispered prayer disrupts what fear tries to establish. You may not feel brave when you pray, but courage is not required for prayer to work. Faith does not depend on how steady you feel. It depends on where you place your trust. A trembling prayer carries more authority than confident fear. Many people believe they must feel strong before they can pray effectively. But prayer is not powered by emotion. It is released by dependence. When strength is gone, prayer becomes pure. When confidence fades, prayer becomes real. In the moment when words feel heavy and breath feels shallow, a simple cry becomes enough. You do not need elegant language or perfect faith. Even a broken sentence can pierce darkness. Fear counts on exhaustion to silence you. Prayer uses exhaustion to deepen connection. Fear analyzes, prayer surrenders. Fear magnifies the problem, prayer magnifies God. Fear isolates you inside your thoughts. Prayer opens a doorway beyond yourself. Fear reminds you of what you cannot control. Prayer reminds you of who is in control. That shift changes everything. The situation might not change instantly, but the atmosphere does. Peace moves in before answers arrive. Strength enters before solutions make sense. There is a mysterious exchange that occurs in prayer. As words leave your mouth, weight leaves your heart. As trust rises, tension loosens. The body may still be tired, but the soul begins to breathe again. Fear exists to drain you, but prayer restores energy where no sleep can reach. It aligns the soul with something greater than the moment. It gives the heart permission to let go. Fear will try to convince you that your prayer is too small, that your faith is weak, that your voice is insignificant. But heaven never measures prayer by volume. It measures by sincerity. A quiet prayer offered in desperation carries more power than a loud voice with no surrender. Faith does not require perfection. It requires presence. In prayer, you refuse to fight alone. You refuse to hold everything inside. You refuse to believe you are abandoned. Speaking to God shifts your perspective from panic to possibility. You move from anticipation of disaster to expectation of help. You may still be in the same room, but you are no longer in the same situation. Something changes not around you, but within you. Prayer does not erase the storm. It gives you strength to stand within it. Protection is more than physical safety. It is spiritual coverage, emotional peace, and mental stability working together beneath God's authority. When a person prays protection, they are not just asking to be spared from danger. They are inviting God's presence to become a surrounding wall around every vulnerable part of their life. Prayer does not build fences, it builds refuge. It does not hide you from life, it covers you in the middle of it. When you speak protection in prayer, you are declaring boundaries in invisible places. Just as a gate controls what may enter a property, prayer controls what is allowed to enter your spirit. Every word of faith spoken becomes a guard at the door of your heart. Fear is denied entry. Confusion is turned away. Despair is refused residence. A praying heart becomes a protected territory. Prayer does not always remove threats, but it disarms them. It does not always prevent storms, but it uproots their power. Sometimes danger is not in the form of an event, but in the form of an emotion, hatred, bitterness, exhaustion, insecurity. Prayer becomes a shield, not just against what may happen, but against what tries to live inside you. Protection means your mind is not owned by anxiety, your emotions are not ruled by fear, and your thoughts are not controlled by defeat. When you pray for your home, you are not only asking for safety within walls, you are establishing an atmosphere that invites peace to dwell there. A prayed for home feels different. Arguments lose their dominance. Tension loses its grip. Rest becomes possible. Light remains even when the world feels dark. Prayer marks territory. It tells the unseen that this space belongs to God. When you pray for your family, you are standing between them and what they cannot see. You may not always be able to protect them physically in every place they go, but prayer travels where you cannot. It reaches classrooms, workplaces, hospitals, and streets. Prayer becomes a covering that remains even when you are absent. You may not be able to fight every battle in their life, but prayer puts divine protection where your hands cannot reach. Covering your future in prayer is an act of trust. It is choosing faith over fear of the unknown. You may not see tomorrow clearly, but prayer places tomorrow in capable hands. Instead of worrying about what might happen, you position your life under divine authority. The future is no longer a threat. It becomes an expectation shaped by surrender. Protection in prayer also involves alignment. When your life is submitted to God, you naturally walk in pathways that bring peace instead of danger. You begin to make wiser choices. You avoid unseen harm because prayer sharpens spiritual awareness. It slows you down when wisdom is required and pushes you forward when courage is needed. Prayer is not superstition. It is strategy. It is daily alignment with heaven. It is choosing coverage over chaos. In a world full of uncertainty, prayer becomes an unshakable defense system. It does not promise that nothing will ever touch you, but it promises that nothing will ever destroy you. Words are never empty. Every sentence carries direction, and every declaration releases influence. What you speak into the atmosphere becomes the language of your environment. Silence allows fear to grow unnoticed, but speech determines what will dominate the room. When faith is spoken aloud, it challenges everything that tries to rise against peace. The atmosphere responds not to what you think, but to what you release with intention. When you speak faith, you are not just talking, you are creating alignment. Your words become a bridge between belief and reality. The mind hears what the mouth says, and the heart follows where the voice leads. This is why hopeless thoughts grow stronger when repeated, and fearful emotions become heavier when rehearsed. In the same way, worship and declaration soften discouragement and weaken what once felt overwhelming. Your voice becomes the steering wheel of your emotional state. Faith Filled words reshape the invisible terrain. Even if nothing changes outwardly at first, something shifts within. Calm begins to rise where chaos once ruled. Courage enters where hopelessness once camped. Strength replaces shaking, not because circumstances dissolve, but because perspective transforms. Speaking peace does not deny the struggle, it re-establishes authority over the struggle. You do not lose power just because life is difficult. You lose power when you stop declaring truth in the midst of it. Speech is never neutral. It either empowers doubt or energizes faith. Complaints feed helplessness. Declarations feed strength. When you consistently speak fear, your world slowly contracts. When you speak faith, your world expands. Words shape the rhythm of the heart. They decide whether you walk into tomorrow with dread or anticipation. A negative tongue builds prisons. A faithful tongue unlocks doors. The spiritual atmosphere reacts to spiritual language. Gratitude invites peace. Worship invites presence. Declaration invites order. When you lift your voice in honor rather than panic, the environment begins to mirror what is being proclaimed. Your physical room may look the same, but the spiritual climate becomes lighter. You begin to sense inner freedom before outer relief. This is not emotional manipulation. It is divine realignment. Your voice carries identity. When you speak strength, you remind your soul who it belongs to. When you speak victory, you distance yourself from defeat. Speaking life is an act of warfare in a world that is constantly trying to convince you to surrender internally. The mouth becomes the front line of transformation. The devil doesn't need to touch your body if he can eventually silence your voice. But when your voice rises, darkness retreats. Declarations also matter because they refuse agreement with despair. Silence often sounds like surrender. Speaking faith is resistance. It announces refusal to partner with hopelessness. It exposes lies by replacing them with truth. With every word aligned in faith, you are rebuilding confidence piece by piece. Even when your heart disagrees at first, your confession teaches your emotions how to follow truth instead of fear. You may not always feel what you say, but faith grows in language before it grows in experience. Repeating truth plants it deep into the soul. Before peace arrives fully, it is first spoken. Before victory is seen, it is first declared. Your mouth often reaches tomorrow before your feet ever do.